look forward to getting mine every month.
Okay.
I just started mine.
Dude, me too. We're synced.
You still get it, Grandma?
Sure do.
It's so heavy. I cried. It's happening again.
I'd invite you up, but I just got my book of the month.
Book of the month. Choose from 5 new books and get your favorite delivered to you monthly.
Stunning video templates. Each video maker is carefully designed to look professional. Our video makers are super easy to use and let anyone with an internet connection create high quality videos in seconds. Edit logos, mockups, videos, and design templates with just a few clicks. Each template is carefully made by design experts, so your work will always look great. Get started with the best video maker at Placie.net.
His career was done. He was going to sit in a wheelchair for the rest of his life. How that came back to me with that same sickening mortal thud when I sat down to this typewriter one morning 2 years ago, turned on the radio, and heard that Thurman Munson had died while trying to land his airplane. There were movies to go see at the Gem, which has long since been torn down. Science fiction movies like Gog with Richard Egan, and westerns with Audie Murphy. Teddy saw every movie Audie Murphy made at least 3 times. He believed Murphy was almost a god. and war movies with John Wayne. There were games and endless bolted meals, lawns to mow, places to run to, walls to pitch pennies against, people to clap you on the back. And now I sit here trying to look through an IBM keyboard and see that time, trying to recall the best and worst of that green and brown summer. And I can almost feel the skinny, scabbed boy still buried in this advancing body, and hear those sounds. But the apotheosis of the memory and the time is Gordon LaChance running down the road to the Florida market with change in his pockets and sweat running down his back. I asked for 3 pounds of hamburger and got some hamburger rolls, 4 bottles of Coke, and a 2-cent church key to open them with. The owner, a man named George Dussett, got the meat and then leaned by his cash register, one hammy hand planted on the counter by the big bottle of hard-cooked eggs, a toothpick in his mouth, his huge beer belly rounding his white T-shirt like a sail filled with a good wind. He stood right there as I shopped, making sure I didn't try to hawk anything. He didn't say a word until he was weighing up the hamburger.
"I know you. You're Denny LaChance's brother, ain't you?"
The toothpick journeyed from one corner of his mouth to the other as if on ball bearings. He reached behind the cash register, picked up a bottle of Soke cream soda, and chugged it.
"Yes, sir, but Denny, he—" "Yeah, I know. That's a sad thing, kid. The Bible says, in the midst of life we are in death. Did you know that?" "Yep. I lost a brother in Korea. You look just like Denny. People ever tell you that?" "Yep. Spitting image."
"Yes, sir, sometimes," I said glumly.
"I remember the year he was all-conference. Halfback he played. Yeah. Could he run? Father, God, and Sonny Jesus. You're probably too young to remember."
He was looking over my head, out through the screen door and into the blasting heat, as if he were having a beautiful vision of my brother. "I remember. Mr. Dussett?"
"What, kid?"
His eyes were still misty with memory. The toothpick trembled a little between his lips. "Your thumb is on that scales."
"What?"
He looked down, astounded, to where the ball of his thumb was pressed firmly on the white enamel. If I hadn't moved away from him a little bit when he started talking about Dennis, the ground meat would have hidden it.
"Why, so it is. Yeah. I guess I just got thinking about your brother. God love him."
George Dussett signed a cross on himself. When he took his thumb off the scales, the needle sprang back 6 ounces. He patted a little more meat on top, and then did the package up with white butcher's paper.
"Okay," he said, past the toothpick. "Let's see what we got here. 3 pounds of Hamburg, that's $1.44. Hamburger rolls, that's 27. 4 tonics, 40 cents. 1 church key, 2 pence. Come to..."
He added it up on the bag. He was going to put the stuff in.
$2.29.
13, I said. He looked up at me very slowly, frowning.
"Huh?"
2.13. You added it wrong.
"Kid, are you—"
You added it wrong, I said. First you put your thumb on the scales, and then you overcharged on the groceries, Mr. Dussett. I was going to throw some Hostess Twinkies on top of that order, but now I guess I won't. I sponged $2.13 down on the Schlitz placemat in front of him. He looked at the money, then at me. The frown was now tremendous, the lines on his face as deep as fissures.
"What are you, kid?"
he said in a low voice that was ominously confidential.
"Are you some kind of smart-ass?"
"No, sir," I said. "But you ain't going to Jap me and get away with it. What would your mother say if she knew you was Japping little kids?" He thrust our stuff into the paper bag with quick, stiff movements, making the Coke bottles clink together. He thrust the bag at me roughly, not caring if I dropped it and broke the tonics or not. His swarthy face was flushed and dull, the frown now frozen in place.
"Okay, kid, here you go. Now what you do is you get the Christ out of my store. I see you in here again, I'm going to throw you out, me. Yeah, smart-ass little son of a whore."
"I won't come in again," I said, walking over to the screen door and pushing it open. The hot afternoon buzzed somnolently along its appointed course outside, sounding green and brown and full of silent light. "Neither will none of my friends. I guess I got 50 or so." "Your brother wasn't no smart-ass," George Dussett yelled. "Fuck you," I yelled, and ran like hell down the road. I heard the screen door bang open like a gunshot, and his bull roar came after me. "If you ever come in here again, I'll fat your lip for you, you little punk!" I ran until I was over the first hill, scared and laughing to myself, my heart beating out a trip-hammer pulse in my chest. Then I slowed to a fast walk, looking back over my shoulder every now and then to make sure he wasn't going to take after me in his car or anything. He didn't, and pretty soon I got to the dump gate. I put the bag inside my shirt, climbed the gate, and monkeyed down the other side. I was halfway across the dump area when I saw something I didn't like. Milo Pressman's port-holed '56 Buick was parked behind his tar-paper shack. If Milo saw me, I was going to be in a world of hurt. And yet there was no sign of either him or the infamous Chopper. But all at once the chain-link fence at the back of the dump seemed very far away. I found myself wishing I'd gone around the outside, but I was now too far into the dump to want to turn around and go back. If Milo saw me climbing the dump fence, I'd probably be in a ditch when I got home, but that didn't scare me as much as Milo yelling for Chopper to sick would. Scary violin music started to play in my head. I kept putting one foot in front of the other, trying to look casual, trying to look as if I belonged here with a paper grocery sack poking out of my shirt, heading for the fence between the dump and the railroad tracks. I was about 50 feet from the fence and just beginning to think that everything was going to be all right after all, when I heard Milo shout, "Hey! Hey, you! Kid! Get away from that fence! Get out of here!" The smart thing to have done would have been to just agree with the guy and go around. But then I was so keyed up that instead of doing the smart thing, I just broke for the fence with a wild yell, my sneakers kicking up dust. Vern, Teddy, and Chris came out of the underbrush on the other side of the fence and stared anxiously through the chain link. "You come back here," Milo bawled. "Come back here or I'll sick my dog on you, damn it!" I did not exactly find that to be the voice of sanity and conciliation, and I ran even faster for the fence, my arms pumping, the brown grocery bag crackling against my skin. Teddy started to laugh his idiotic, chortling laugh into the air like some reed instrument being played by a lunatic. "Go, Gordy, go!" Vernon screamed, and Milo yelled, "Sick 'em, Chopper! Go get 'em, boy!" I threw the bag over the fence, and Vern elbowed Teddy out of the way to catch it. Behind me I could hear Chopper coming, shaking the earth, blurting fire out of one distended nostril and ice out of the other, dripping sulphur from his champing jaws. I threw myself halfway up the fence with one leap, screaming. I made it to the top in no more than 3 seconds, and simply leaped. I never thought about it, never even looked down to see what I might land on. What I almost landed on was Teddy, who was doubled over and laughing like crazy. His glasses had fallen off, and tears were streaming out of his eyes. I missed him by inches and hit the clay-gravel embankment just to his left. At the same instant, Chopper hit the chain-link fence behind me and let out a howl of mingled pain and disappointment. I turned around, holding one skinned knee, and got my first look at the famous Chopper, and my first lesson in the vast differences between myth and reality. Instead of some huge hellhound with red, savage eyes and teeth jutting out from his mouth like straight pipes from a hot rod, I was looking at a medium-sized mongrel dog that was a perfectly common black and white. He was yapping and jumping fruitlessly, going up on his back legs to paw the fence. Teddy was now strutting up and down in front of the fence, twiddling his glasses in one hand and inciting Chopper to even greater rage. "Kiss my ass, Choppy," Teddy invited, spittle flying from his lips. "Kiss my ass! Bite shit!" He bumped his fanny against the chain-link fence, and Chopper did his level best to take Teddy up on his invitation. He got nothing for his pains but good, healthy nose bump. He began to bark crazily, foam flying from his snout. Teddy kept bumping his rump against the fence, and Chopper kept lunging at it, always missing,
doing nothing but racking out his nose, which was now bleeding. Teddy kept exhorting him, calling him by the somehow grisly diminutive Choppy, and Chris and Vern were lying weakly on the embankment, laughing so hard that they could now do little more than wheeze. And here came Milo Pressman, dressed in sweat-stained fatigues and a New York Giants baseball cap, his mouth drawn down in distracted anger. "Here! Here!" he was yelling. "You boys stop a-teasing that dog. You hear me? Stop it right now!" "Bite it, Choppy!" Teddy yelled, strutting up and down our side of the fence like a mad Prussian reviewing his troops. "Come on and sick me! Sick me!" Chopper went nuts. I mean it sincerely. He ran around in a big circle, yelping and barking and foaming, rear feet spewing up tough little dry clods. He went around about 3 times, getting his courage up, I guess, and then he launched himself straight at the security fence. He must have been going 30 miles an hour when he hit it. I kid you not. His doggy lips were stretched back from his teeth, and his ears were flying in the slipstream. The whole fence made a low, musical sound, as the chain link was not just driven back against the posts, but sort of stretched back. It was like a zither note. Zim! A strangled yawp came out of Chopper's mouth. Both eyes came up blank, and he did a totally amazing reverse snap roll, landing on his back with a solid thump that sent dust puffing up around him. He just lay there for a moment, and then he crawled off with his tongue hanging crookedly from the left side of his mouth. At this, Milo himself went almost berserk with rage. His complexion darkened to a scary plum color. Even his scalp was purple under the short hedgehog bristles of his flat-top haircut. Sitting stunned in the dirt, both knees of my jeans torn out, my heart still thudding from the nearness of my escape, I thought that Milo looked like a human version of Chopper. "I know you," Milo raved. "You're Teddy Duchamp. I know all of you. Sonny, I'll beat your ass, teasing my dog like that." "Like to see you try," Teddy raved right back. "Let's see you climb over this fence and get me, fat ass." "What? What did you call me?" "Fat ass," Teddy screamed happily. "Lard bucket, tub of guts, come on, come on." He was jumping up and down, fists clenched, sweat flying from his hair. "Teach you to sick your stupid dog on people. Come on, like to see you try." "You little tin weasel peckerwood loony, son. I'll see your mother gets an invitation to go down and talk to the judge in court about what you done to my dog." "What did you call me?" Teddy asked hoarsely. He had stopped jumping up and down. His eyes had gone huge and glassy, and his skin was the color of lead. Milo had called Teddy a lot of things, but he was able to go back and get the one that had struck home with no trouble at all. Since then I have noticed again and again what a genius people have for that, for finding the loony button down inside, and not just pressing it, but hammering on the fucker. "Your dad was a loony," he said, grinning. "Loony up in Togas, that's what. Crazier'n a shithouse rat. Crazier'n a buck with tickwood fever. Nuttier'n a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs. Loony. No wonder you're acting the way you are, with a loony for a "Your mother blows dead rats!" Teddy screamed. "And if you call my dad a loony again, I'll fucking kill you, you cocksucker!" "Loony," Milo said smugly. He found the button all right. "Loony's kid, Loony's kid. Your father's got toys in the attic, kid. Tough break." Vern and Chris had been getting over their laughing fit, perhaps getting ready to appreciate the seriousness of the situation and call Teddy off. But when Teddy told Milo that his mother blew dead rats, they went back into hysterics again, lying there on the bank, rolling from side to side, their feet kicking, holding their bellies. "No more," Chris said weakly. "No more, please. No more. I swear to God I'm going to bust." Chopper was walking around in a large, dazed figure 8 behind Milo. He looked like the losing fighter about 10 seconds after the ref has ended the match and awarded the winner a TKO. Meanwhile, Teddy and Milo continued the discussion of Teddy's father, standing nose to nose with the wire fence Milo was too old and too fat to climb between them. Don't you say nothing else about my dad. My dad stormed the beaches at Normandy, you fucking wet end.
Yeah, well, where is he now, you ugly little four-eyed turd? He's up to Togus, ain't he? He's up to Togus because he went fucking Section 8.
Okay, that's it, Teddy said. That's it, that's the end. I'm gonna kill you. He threw himself at the fence and started up.
You come on and try it, you slimy little bastard.
Milo stood back, grinning and waiting. No, I shouted. I got to my feet, grabbed Teddy by the loose seat of his jeans, and pulled him off the fence. We both staggered back and fell over, him on top. He squashed my balls pretty good, and I groaned. Nothing hurts like having your balls squashed, you know it? But I kept my arms locked around Teddy's middle. Let me up, Teddy sobbed, writhing in my arms. Let me up, Gordy. Nobody ranks out my old man. Let me up, goddammit, let me up. That's just what he wants, I shouted in his ear. He wants to get you over there and beat the piss out of you and then take you to the cops. Huh? Teddy craned around to look at me, his face dazed.
Never mind your smart-mouth kid, Milo said, advancing to the fence again with his hands curled into ham-sized fists. Let him fight his own battles.
Sure, I said. You only outweigh him by 500 pounds.
I know you, too, Milo said ominously. Your name's LeChance.
He pointed to where Vern and Chris were finally picking themselves up, still breathing fast from laughing so hard.
And those guys are Chris Chambers and one of those stupid Tessio kids. All your fathers are going to get calls from me, except for the loony up to Togus. You'll go to the formatory, every one of you, juvenile delinquents.
He stood flat on his feet, big freckled hands held out like a guy who wanted to play one potato, two potato, breathing hard, eyes narrow, waiting for us to cry or say we were sorry or maybe give him Teddy so he could feed Teddy to Chopper. Chris made an O out of his thumb and index finger and spat neatly through it. Vern hummed and looked to the sky. Teddy said, Come on, Gordy. Let's get away from this asshole before I puke.
Oh, you're gonna get it, you foul-mouthed little whoremaster. Wait till I get you to the constable.
We heard what you said about his father, I told him. We're all witnesses, and you sicked that dog on me. That's against the law. Milo looked a trifle uneasy.
You was trespassing.
The hell I was. The dump's public property.
You climbed the fence.
Sure I did. After you sicked your dog on me, I said, hoping that Milo wouldn't recall that I'd also climbed the gate to get in. What'd you think I was going to do? Stand there and let him rip me to pieces? Come on, you guys, let's go. It stinks around here.
Formatory,
Milo promised hoarsely, his voice shaking. Formatory for you, wise guys. Can't wait to tell the cops how you called a war vet a fucking loony, Chris called back over his shoulder as we moved away. What did you do in the war, Mr. Pressman?
None of your damn business, Milo shrieked. You hurt my dog.
Put it on your TF flip and send it to the chaplain, Vernon muttered. And then we were climbing the railroad embankment again.
Come back here,
Milo shouted, but his voice was fainter now, and he seemed to be losing interest. Teddy shot him the finger as we walked away. I looked back over my shoulder when we got to the top of the embankment. Milo was standing there behind the security fence, a big man in a baseball cap with his dog sitting beside him. His fingers were hooked through the small chain-link diamonds as he shouted at us, and all at once I felt sorry for him. He looked like the biggest third grader in the world, locked inside the playground by mistake, yelling for someone to let him out. He kept yelling for a while, and then he either gave up or we got out of range. No more was seen or heard of Milo Pressman and Chopper that day. Chapter 13. There was some discussion, in righteous tones that were actually kind of force-sounding, about how we had shown that creepy Milo Pressman we weren't just another bunch of pussies. I told how the guy at the Florida market had tried to jap us, and then we fell into a gloomy silence, thinking it over.
For my part, I was thinking that maybe there was something to that stupid Goocher business after all. Things couldn't have turned out much worse. In fact, I thought it might be better to just keep going and spare my folks the pain of having one son in the Castle View Cemetery and one in South Wyndham's Boys' Correctional. I had no doubt that Milo would go to the cops as soon as the importance of the dump having been closed at the time of the incident filtered into his thick skull. When that happened, he would realize that I really had been trespassing, public property or not. Probably that gave him every right in the world to sick his stupid dog on me. And while Chopper wasn't the hellhound he was cracked up to be, he sure would have ripped the sit-down out of my jeans if I hadn't won the race to the fence. All of it put a big, dark crimp in the day, and there was another gloomy idea rolling around inside my head, the idea that this was no lark after all, and maybe we deserved our bad luck. Maybe it was even God warning us to go home. What were we doing, anyway, going to look at some kid that had gotten himself all mashed up by a freight train? But we were doing it, and none of us wanted to stop. We had almost reached the trestle which carried the tracks across the river when Teddy burst into tears. It was as if a great inner tidal wave had broken through a carefully constructed set of mental dikes. No bullshit. It was that sudden and that fierce. The sobs doubled him over like punches, and he sort of collapsed into a heap, his hands going from his stomach to the mutilated gobs of flesh that were the remains of his ears. He went on crying in hard, violent bursts. None of us knew what the fuck to do. It wasn't crying like when you got hit by a line drive while you were playing shortstop, or smashed on the head playing tackle football on the common, or when you fell off your bike. There was nothing physically wrong with him. We walked away a little and watched him, our hands in our pockets. "Hey, man," Vern said in a very thin voice. Chris and I looked at Vern hopefully. "Hey, man" was always a good start, but Vern couldn't follow it up. Teddy leaned forward onto the cross ties and put a hand over his eyes. Now he looked like he was doing the Allah bit, salami, salami, bologna, as Popeye says. Except it wasn't funny. At last, when the force of his crying had trailed off a little, it was Chris who went to him. He was the toughest guy in our gang, maybe even tougher than Jamie Gallant, I thought privately. But he was also the guy who made the best peace. He had a way about it. I'd seen him sit down on the curb next to a little kid with a scraped knee, a kid he didn't even fucking know, and get him talking about something. The Shrine Circus that was coming to town, or Huckleberry Hound on TV, until the kid forgot he was supposed to be hurt. Chris was good at it. He was tough enough to be good at it. "Listen, Teddy, what do you care what a fat old pile of shit like him said about your father, huh? I mean, sincerely, that don't change nothing, does it? What a fat old pile of shit like him says, huh? Huh, does it?" Teddy shook his head violently. It changed nothing. But to hear it spoken of in bright daylight, something must have gone over and over in his mind while he was lying awake in bed and looking at the moon off-center in one window pane. Something he must have thought about in his slow and broken way until it seemed almost holy, trying to make sense out of it, and then to have it brought home to him that everybody else had merely dismissed his dad as a loony. That had rocked him. But it changed nothing. Nothing. "He still stormed the beaches at Normandy, right?" Chris said. He picked up one of Teddy's sweaty, grimy hands and patted it. Teddy nodded fiercely, crying. Snot was running out of his nose. "Do you think that pile of shit was at Normandy?" Teddy shook his head violently. No. "Do you think that guy knows you?" No, but... Or your father? He one of your father's buddies? No! Angry, horrified, the thought. Teddy's chest heaved and more sobs came out of it. He had pushed his hair away from his ears, and I could see the round brown plastic button of the hearing aid set in the middle of the right one. The shape of the hearing aid made more sense than the shape of his ear, if you get what I mean. Chris said calmly, "Talk is cheap." Teddy nodded, still not looking up.
And whatever's between you and your old man, talk can't change that.
Teddy's head shook without definition, unsure if this was true. Someone had redefined his pain, and redefined it in shockingly common terms. That would, loony, have to be examined. Fucking Section 8? Later, in depth, on long sleepless nights. Chris rocked him.
He was ranking you, man, he said in soothing cadences that were almost a lullaby. He was just trying to rank you over that friggin' fence, you know it? No strain, man. No fucking strain. He don't know nothing about your old man. He don't know nothing but stuff he heard from those rum-dums down at the Mellow Tiger. He's just dog shit, man. Right, Teddy? Huh? Right?
Teddy's crying was down to sniffles. He wiped his eyes, leaving 2 sooty rings around them, and sat up.
I'm okay,
he said, and the sound of his own voice seemed to convince him.
Yeah, I'm okay.
He stood up and put his glasses back on, dressing his naked face, it seemed to me. He laughed thinly and swiped his bare arm across the snot on his upper lip.
Fucking crybaby, right?
No, man, Vern said uncomfortably.
If anyone was ranking out my dad, then you gotta kill him,
Teddy said briskly, almost arrogantly.
Kill their asses, right, Chris?
Right, Chris said amiably, and clapped Teddy on the back.
Right, Gordy?
Absolutely, I said, wondering how Teddy could care so much for his dad when his dad had practically killed him, and how I couldn't seem to give much of a shit one way or the other about my own dad, when so far as I could remember he had never laid a hand on me since I was 3 and got some bleach from under the sink and started to eat it. We walked another 200 yards down the tracks, and Teddy said in a quieter voice,
Hey, if I spoiled your good time, I'm sorry. I guess that was pretty stupid shit back there at the fence. I ain't sure I want it to be no good time, Vern said suddenly.
Chris looked at him.
You saying you want to go back, man? No,
Vern's face nodded in thought.
But going to see a dead kid, it shouldn't be a party, maybe. I mean, if you can dig it,
He looked at us rather wildly.
I could be a little scared, if you get me.
Nobody said anything, and Vern plunged on.
Sometimes I get nightmares, like, you guys remember the time Danny Norton left that pile of old funny books? The ones with the vampires and people getting cut up and all that shit? Jeez, I'm crow. I wake up in the middle of the night dreaming about some guy hanging in a house with his face all green or something, you know, like that. And it seems like there's something under the bed, and if I dangled a hand over the side, that thing might, grab me.
We all began to nod. We knew about the night sweats. I would have laughed then, though, if you had told me that one day, not too many years from then, I'd parlay a simple case of the night sweats into about $1 million.
And I don't dare say anything because my friggin' brother, well, Billy, he broadcast it.
He shrugged miserably.
So I'm scared to look at that kid, 'cause if he's, if he's really bad.
I swallowed and glanced at Chris. He was looking gravely at Vern and nodding for him to go on.
If he's really bad, Vern resumed, I'll have nightmares about him and wake up thinking it's him under my bed, all cut up in a pool of blood like he just came out of one of those Salad Master gadgets they show on TV. Just eyeballs and hair, but moving somehow, if you can dig that. Moving somehow, and getting ready to grab. Jesus Christ, Teddy said thickly. What a fucking bedtime story. Well, I can't help it, Vern said, his voice defensive. But I feel like we have to see him, even if there are bad dreams, Like we have to. But maybe it shouldn't be no good time. Yeah, Chris said softly. Maybe it shouldn't, Vern said pleadingly. You won't tell none of the other guys, will you? I don't mean about the nightmares. Everybody has those. I mean about waking up and thinking there might be something under the bed. I'm too fucking old for the bogeyman. We all said we wouldn't tell, and a glum silence fell over us again. It was only 2:45, but it felt much later. It was too hot and too much had happened. We weren't even over into Harlow yet. We were going to have to pick them up and lay them down if we were going to make some real miles before dark. We passed the railroad junction and a signal on a tall, rusty pole, and all of us paused to chuck cinders at the steel flag on top, but nobody hit it. And around 3:30 we came to the Castle River and the GS and WM trestle, which crossed it. Chapter 14. The river was better than 100 yards across at that point in 1960. I've been back to look at it since then and found it had narrowed up quite a bit during the years between. They're always fooling with the river, trying to make it work better for the mills, and they put in so many dams that it's pretty well tamed. But in those days there were only 3 dams on the whole length of the river as it ran across all of New Hampshire and half of Maine. The castle was still pretty free back then, and every 3rd spring it would overflow its banks and cover Route 136 in either Harlow or Danvers Junction, or both. Now, at the end of the driest summer western Maine had ever seen since the Depression, it was still broad. From where we stood on the Castle Rock side, the bulking forest on the Harlow side looked like a different country altogether. The pines and spruces over there were bluish in the heat haze of the afternoon. The rails went across the water 50 feet up, supported by an underpinning of tarred wooden support posts and crisscrossing beams. The water was so shallow you could look down and see the tops of the cement plugs which had been planted 10 feet deep in the riverbed to hold up the trestle. The trestle itself was pretty chintzy. The rails ran over a long, narrow wooden platform of 6x4s. There was a 4-inch gap between each pair of these beams where you could look all the way down into the water. On the sides there was no more than 18 inches between the rail and the edge of the trestle. If a train came, it was maybe enough room to avoid getting plastered, but the wind generated by highballing freight would surely sweep you off to a fall to certain death against the rocks just below the surface of the shallow running water. Looking at the trestle, we all felt fear start to crawl around in our bellies, and mixing uneasily with the fear was the excitement of a boss dare, a really big one, something you could brag on for weeks after you got home, if you got home. That queer light was creeping back into Teddy's eyes, and I thought he wasn't seeing the GS and WM train trestle at all, but a long sandy beach, 1,000 LSTs aground in the foaming waves, 10,000 GIs charging up the sand, combat boots digging. They were leaping rolls of barbed wire, tossing grenades at pillboxes, overrunning machine gun nests. We were standing beside the tracks where the cinders sloped away towards the river's cut, the place where the embankment stopped and the trestle began. Looking down, I could see where the slope started to get steep. The cinders gave way to straggly, tough-looking bushes and slabs of gray rock. Further down, there were a few stunted firs with exposed roots writhing their way out of fissures in their plates of rock. They seemed to be looking down at their own miserable reflections in the running water. At this point, the Castle River actually looked fairly clean. At Castle Rock, it was just entering Maine's textile mill belt. But there were no fish jumping out there, although the river was clear enough to see the bottom. You had to go another 10 miles upstream and towards New Hampshire before you could see any fish in the castle. There were no fish, and along the edges of the river you could see dirty collars of foam around some of the rocks. The foam was the color of old ivory. The river's smell was not particularly pleasant either. It smelled like a laundry hamper full of mildewy towels. Dragonflies stitched at the surface of the water and laid their eggs with impunity. There were no trout to eat them. Hell, there weren't even any shiners. "Man," Chris said softly. "Come on," Teddy said in that brisk, arrogant way. "Let's go." He was already edging his way out, walking on the 6x4s between the shining rails. "Say," Fern said uneasily, "any of you guys know when the next train's due?" We all shrugged. I said, "There's the Route 136 bridge." "Hey, come on, give me a break," Teddy cried. "That means walking 5 miles down the river on this side and then 5 miles back up on the other side. It'll take us until dark. If we use the trestle, we can get to the same place in 10 minutes. "But if a train comes, there's nowhere to go," Vern said. He wasn't looking at Teddy. He was looking down at the fast, bland river. "Fuck there isn't," Teddy said indignantly. He swung over the edge and held one of the wooden supports between the rails. He hadn't gone out very far. His sneakers were almost touching the ground, but the thought of doing that same thing above the middle of the river with a 50-foot drop beneath and a train bellowing by just over my head, a train that would probably be dropping some nice hot sparks into my hair and down the back of my neck, none of that actually made me feel like Queen for a day. "See how easy it is?" Teddy said. He dropped to the embankment, dusted his hands, and climbed back up beside us. "You telling me you're going to hang on that way if it's a 200-car freight?" Chris asked. "Just sort of hang there by your hands for 5 or 10 minutes?" "You chicken?" Teddy shouted. "No, just asking what you do," Chris said, grinning. "Peace, man." "Go around if you want to," Teddy brayed. "Who gives a fuck? I'll wait for you. I'll take a nap." "One train already went by," I said reluctantly. "And there probably isn't any more than 1-2 trains a day that go through Harlow. Look at this." I kicked the weeds growing up through the railroad ties with one sneaker. There were no weeds growing between the tracks which ran between Castle Rock and Lewiston. "There, see?" Teddy was triumphant. "But still there's a chance," I added. "Yeah," Chris said. He was looking only at me, his eyes sparkling. "Dare you a chance?" "Dares go first." "Okay," Chris said. He widened his gaze to take in Teddy and Vern. "Any pussies here?" "No!" Teddy shouted. Vern cleared his throat, croaked, cleared it again, and said no in a very small voice. He smiled a weak, sick smile. "Okay," Chris said, but we hesitated for a moment, even Teddy looking warily up and down the tracks. I knelt down and took one of the steel rails firmly in my hand, never minding that it was almost hot enough to blister the skin. The rail was mute. "Okay," I said, and as I said it, some guy pole-vaulted in my stomach. He dug his pole all the way into my balls, it felt like, and ended up sitting astride my heart. We went out onto the trestle single file. Chris first, then Teddy, then Vern, and me playing tail-end Charlie because I was the one who said dares go first. We walked on the platform cross-ties between the rails, and you had to look at your feet whether you were scared of heights or not. A misstep and you would go down to your crotch, probably with a broken ankle to pay. The embankment dropped away beneath me, and every step further out seemed to seal our decision more firmly, and to make it feel more suicidally stupid. I stopped to look up when I saw the rocks giving way to water far beneath me. Chris and Teddy were a long way ahead, almost out over the middle, and Vern was tottering slowly along behind them, peering studiously down at his feet. He looked like an old lady trying out stilts with his head poked downward, his back hunched, his arms held out for balance. I looked back over my shoulder. Too far, man. I had to keep going now, and not only because a train might come. If I went back, I'd be a pussy for life. So I got walking again. After looking down at that endless series of cross-ties for a while, with a glimpse of running water between each pair, I started to feel dizzy and disorientated. Each time I brought my foot down, part of my brain assured me it was going to plunge through into space, even though I could see it was not. I became acutely aware of all the noises inside me and outside me, like some crazy orchestra tuning up to play. The steady thump of my heart, the blood beat in my ears like a drum being played with brushes, the creak of sinews like the strings of a violin that has been tuned radically upward, the steady hiss of the river, the hot hum of a locust digging into tight bark, the monotonous cry of a chickadee, and somewhere far away a barking dog. Chopper, maybe. The mildewy smell of the Castle River was strong in my nose. The long muscles in my thighs were trembling.
I kept thinking how much safer it would be, probably faster as well, if I just got down on my hands and knees and scuttered along that way. But I wouldn't do that. None of us would. If the Saturday matinee movies down to the Gem had taught us anything, it was that only losers crawl. It was one of the central tenets of the gospel according to Hollywood. Good guys walk firmly upright, and if your sinews are creeping like overtuned violin strings because of the adrenaline rush growing on in your body, and if the long muscles in your thighs are trembling for the same reasons, why, so be it. I had to stop in the middle of the trestle and look up at the sky for a while. That dizzy feeling had been getting worse. I saw phantom cross ties. They seemed to float right in front of my nose. Then they faded out, and I began to feel okay again. I looked ahead and saw I had almost caught up with Vern, who was slow-poking along worse than ever. Chris and Teddy were almost all the way across. And although I've since written 7 books about people who do such exotic things as read minds and precognate the future, that was when I had my first and last psychic flash. I'm sure that's what it was. How else to explain it? I squatted and made a fist around the rail on my left. It thrummed in my hand. It was thrumming so hard that it was like gripping a bundle of deadly metallic snakes. You've heard it said, "His bowels turned to water"? I know what that phrase means. Exactly what it means. It may be the most accurate cliché ever coined. I've been scared since, badly scared, but I've never been as scared as I was in that moment, holding that hot, live rail. It seemed that for a moment all my works below throat level just went limp and lay there in an internal faint. A thin stream of urine ran listlessly down the inside of one thigh. My mouth opened. I didn't open it. It opened by itself, the jaw dropping like a trap door from which the hinge pins had suddenly been moved. My tongue was plastered suffocatingly against the roof of my mouth. All my muscles were locked. That was the worst. My works were limp, but my muscles were in a kind of dreadful lock-bolt, and I couldn't move at all. It was only for a moment, but in the subjective time stream it seemed forever. All sensory input became intensified, as if some power surge had occurred in the electrical flow of my brain, cranking everything up from 110 volts to 220. I could hear a plane passing in the sky somewhere near, and had time to wish I was on it, just sitting in a window seat with a Coke in my hand and gazing idly down at the shining line of a river whose name I did not know. I could see every little splinter and gouge in the tarred crossbite I was squatting on, and out of the corner of my eye I could see the rail itself with my hands still clutched around it, glittering insanely. The vibration from that rail sank so deeply into my hand that when I took it away it still vibrated, the nerve endings kicking each other over again and again, tingling the way a hand or a foot tingles when it has been asleep and is starting to wake up. I could taste my saliva, suddenly all electric and sour and thickened to curds along my gums, and worst, somehow most horrible of all, I couldn't hear the train yet, could not know if it was rushing at me from ahead or behind, or how close it was. It was invisible. It was unannounced, except for that shaking rail in my hand. There was only that to advertise its imminent arrival. An image of Ray Brower, dreadfully mangled and thrown into a ditch somewhere like a ripped-open laundry bag, reeled before my eyes. We would join him, or at least Vern and I would, or at least I would. We had invited ourselves to our own funerals. The last thought broke the paralysis, and I shot to my feet. I probably would have looked like a jack-in-the-box to anyone watching, but to myself I felt like a boy in underwater slow motion, shooting up not through 5 feet of air, but rather up through 500 feet of water, moving slowly, moving with a dreadful languidness as the water parted grudgingly. But at last I did break the surface. I screamed, "Train!" The last of the paralysis fell from me, and I began to run. Vern's head jerked back over his shoulder. The surprise that distorted his face was almost comically exaggerated, written as large as the letters in a Dick and Jane primer. He saw me break into my clumsy, shambling run, dancing from one horribly high cross-tie to the next, and knew I wasn't joking. He began to run himself. Far ahead I could see Chris stepping off the ties and onto the solid, safe embankment, and I hated him with a sudden bright green hate as juicy and as bitter as the sap in an April leaf.
He was safe. That fucker was safe. I watched him drop to his knees and grab a rail. My left foot almost slipped into the yaw beneath me. I flailed with my arms, my eyes as hot as ball bearings in some runaway piece of machinery. Got my balance and ran on. Now I was right behind Vern. We were past the halfway point, and for the first time I heard the train. It was coming from behind us, coming from the Castle Rock side of the river. It was a slow, rumbling noise that began to rise slightly and sort itself into the diesel thrum of the engine and the higher, more sinister sound of big grooved wheels turning heavily on the rails. "Ah, shit!" Vern screamed. "Run, you pussy!" I yelled and thumped him on the back. "I can't! I'll fall! Run faster! Ah, shit!" But he ran faster, a shambling scarecrow with a bare, sunburnt back, the collar of his shirt swinging and dangling below his butt. I could see the sweat standing out on his peeling shoulder blades, standing out in perfect little beads. I could see the fine down on the nape of his neck. His muscles clenched and loosened, clenched and loosened, clenched and loosened. His spine stood out in a series of knobs, each knob casting its own crescent-shaped shadow. I could see that these knobs grew closer together as they approached his neck. He was still holding his bedroll, and I was still holding mine. Vern's feet thudded on the cross-ties. He almost missed one, lunged forward with his arms out, and I whacked him on the back again to keep him going. "Gordy, I can't! Oh, shit! Run faster, dickface!" I bellowed. And was I enjoying this? Yeah, in some peculiar, self-destructive way that I've experienced since only when completely and utterly drunk, I was. I was driving Vern Tessio like a drover getting a particularly fine cow to market, and maybe he was enjoying his own fear in that same way, bawling like that selfsame cow, hollering and sweating, his ribcage rising and falling like the bellows of a blacksmith on a speed trip, clumsily keeping his footing, lurching ahead. The train was very loud now, its engine deepening to a steady rumble. Its whistle sounded as it crossed the junction point where we had paused to chuck cinders at the rail flag. I'd finally gotten my hellhound, like it or not. I kept waiting for the trestle to start shaking under my feet. When that happened, it would be right behind us. "Go faster, Vern! Faster!" "Oh, God, Gordy! Oh, God, Gordy! Oh, God! Oh, shit!" The freight's electric horn suddenly spanked the air into 100 pieces with one long, loud blast, making everything you ever saw in a movie or a comic book or one of your own daydreams fly apart, letting you know what both the heroes and the cowards really heard when death flew at them. Wonk! Wonk! And then Chris was below us and to the right, and Teddy was behind him, his glasses flashing back arcs of sunlight, and they were both mouthing a single word, and the word was jump! But the train had sucked all the blood out of the word, leaving only its shape in their mouths. The trestle began to shake as the train charged across it. We jumped. Vern landed full length in the dust, and the cinders and I landed right beside him, almost on top of him. I never did see that train, nor do I know if its engineer saw us. When I mentioned the possibility that he hadn't seen us to Chris a couple of years later, he said, "They don't blow the electric horn just like that for chucks, Gordy." But he could have. He could have been blowing it just for the hell of it, I suppose. Right then, such fine points didn't matter much. I clapped my hands over my ears and dug my face into the hot dirt as the freight went by, metal squalling against metal, the air buffeting us. I had no urge to look at it. It was a long freight, but I never looked at all. Before it had passed completely, I felt a warm hand on my neck and knew it was Chris's. When it was gone, when I was sure it was gone, I raised my head like a soldier coming out of his foxhole at the end of a day-long artillery barrage. Vern was still plastered into the dirt, shivering. Chris was still cross-legged between us, one hand on Vern's sweaty neck, the other still on mine. When Vern finally sat up, shaking all over and licking his lips compulsively, Chris said, What you guys think if we drink those Cokes? Could anybody use one besides me?
We all thought we could use one. Chapter 15. About a quarter of a mile along on the Harlow side, the GS and WM tracks plunged directly into the woods. The heavily wooded land sloped down to a marshy area. It was full of mosquitoes almost as big as fighter planes, but it was cool, blessedly cool. We sat down in the shade to drink our Cokes. Vern and I threw our shirts over our shoulders to keep the bugs off, but Chris and Teddy just sat naked to the waist, looking as cool and collected as two Eskimos in an ice house. We hadn't been there 5 minutes when Vern had to go off into the bushes and take a squat, which led to a good deal of joking and elbowing when he got back. "Train scare you much, Vern?" "No," Vern said. "I was going to squat when we got across anyway. I had to take a squat, you know." "Vern," Chris and Teddy chorused. "Come on, you guys, I did. Sincerely." "Then you won't mind if we examine the seat of your jockeys for Hershey squirts, will you?" Teddy asked, and Vern laughed, finally understanding that he was getting ribbed. "Go screw." Chris turned to me. "That train scare you, Gordy?" "Nope," I said, and sipped my Coke. "Not much, you sucker." He punched my arm. "Sincerely, I wasn't scared at all." "Yeah? You wasn't scared?" Teddy was looking me over carefully. "No, I was fucking petrified." This slew all of them, even Vern, and we laughed long and hard. Then we just laid back, not goofing any more, just drinking our Cokes and being quiet. My body felt warm, exercised, at peace with itself. Nothing in it was working cross-grained to anything else. I was alive and glad to be. Everything seemed to stand out with a special dearness, and although I never could have said that out loud, I didn't think it mattered. Maybe that sense of dearness was something I wanted just for myself. I think I began to understand a little bit that day what makes men become daredevils. I paid $20 to watch Evel Knievel attempt his jump over the Snake River Canyon a couple of years ago, and my wife was horrified. She told me that if I'd been born a Roman, I would have been right there in the Colosseum, munching grapes and watching as the lions disemboweled the Christians. She was wrong, although it was hard for me to explain why, and really I think she thought I was just jiving her. I didn't cough up that 20 to watch the man die on coast-to-coast closed-circuit TV, although I was quite sure that was exactly what was going to happen. I went because of the shadows that are always somewhere behind our eyes, because of what Bruce Springsteen calls the darkness on the edge of town in one of his songs, and at one time or another I think everyone wants to dare that darkness, in spite of the jalopy bodies that some joker of a god gave us human beings. No, not in spite of our jalopy bodies, but because of them. "Hey, tell that story," Chris said suddenly, sitting up. "What story?" I asked, although I guess I knew. I always felt uncomfortable when the talk turned to my stories, although all of them seemed to like them. Wanting to tell stories, even wanting to write them down, that was just peculiar enough to be boss, like wanting to grow up to be a sewer inspector or a Grand Prix mechanic. Richie Jenner, a kid who hung around with us until his family moved to Nebraska in 1959, was the first one to find out that I wanted to be a writer when I grew up, that I wanted to do that for my full-time job. We were up in my room just fooling around, and he found a bunch of handwritten pages under the comic books in a carton in my closet. "What's this?" Richie asks. "Nothing," I say, and try to grab them back. Richie held the pages up, out of reach. I must admit that I didn't try very hard to get them back. I wanted him to read them, and at the same time I didn't. An uneasy mix of pride and shyness that has never changed in me very much when someone asks to look. The act of writing itself is done in secret, like masturbation. Oh, I have one friend who has done things like write stories in the display windows of bookshops and department stores, but this is a man who is nearly crazy with courage, the kind of man you'd have to have with you if you just happened to fall down with a heart attack in a city where no one knew you. For me, it always wants to be sex and always falls short. It's always that adolescent handjob in the bathroom when the door's locked. Richie sat right there on the end of my bed for most of the afternoon, reading his way through the stuff I'd been doing. most of it influenced by the same sort of comic books as the ones that had given Vern nightmares. And when he was done, Richie looked at me in a strange new way that made me feel very peculiar, as if he had been forced to reappraise my whole personality. He said, "You're pretty good at this. Why didn't you show these to Chris?" I said, "No, I wanted it to be a secret." And Richie said, "Why? It ain't pussy. You ain't no queer. I mean, it ain't poetry." Still, I made him promise not to tell anybody about my stories, and of course he did, and it turned out most of them liked to read the stuff I wrote, which was mostly about getting buried alive or some crook coming back from the dead and slaughtering the jury that had condemned him in 12 interesting ways, or a maniac that went crazy and chopped a lot of people into veal cutlets before the hero, Kurt Cannon, cut the subhuman, screeching madman to pieces with round after round from his smoking .45 automatic. In my stories, they were always rounds, never bullets. For a change of pace, there were the Le Dio stories. Le Dio was a town in France, and during 1942, a grim squad of tired American dog faces were trying to retake it from the Nazis. This was 2 years before I discovered that the Allies didn't land in France until 1944. They went on trying to retake it, fighting their way from street to street, through about 40 stories, which I wrote between the ages of 9 and 14. Teddy was absolutely made for the Le Dio stories, and I think I wrote the last dozen or so just for him. By then I was hardly sick of Le Dio, and writing things like Mon Dieu and Cherchez la Boche and Fermez la Porte. In Le Dio, French peasants were always hissing to GI dog faces to Fermez la Porte. But Teddy would hunch over the pages, his eyes big, his brow beaded with sweat, his face twisting. There were times when I could almost hear air-cooled Brownings and whistling 88s going off in his skull. The way he clamored for more Le Dio stories was both pleasing and frightening. Nowadays, writing is my work, and the pleasure has diminished a little, and more often that guilty, masturbatory pleasure that has become associated in my head with the coldly clinical images of artificial insemination. I come according to the rules and regs laid down in my publishing contract, and although no one is ever going to call me the Thomas Wolfe of my generation, I rarely feel like a cheat. I get it off as hard as I can every fucking time. Doing less would, in an odd way, be like going faggot, or what that meant to us back then. What scares me is how often it hurts these days. Back then I was sometimes disgusted by how damn good it felt to write. These days I sometimes look at this typewriter and wonder when it's going to run out of good words. I don't want that to happen. I guess I can bear the pain as long as I don't run out of good words, you know?
"What's this story?" Vernon asked uneasily. "It ain't a horror story, is it, Gordy? I don't think I want to hear no horror stories. I'm not up for that, man." "No, it ain't a horror," Chris said. "It's really funny. Gross, but funny. Go on, Gordy. Hammer that fucker to us." "Is it about Le Dio?" Teddy asked. "No, it ain't about Le Dio, you fucking psycho," Chris said, and Rabbit punched him. "It's about this pie-eating contest." "Hey, I didn't even write it down yet," I said. "Yeah, but tell it." "You guys want to hear it?" "Sure," Teddy said. "Boss." "Well, it's about this made-up town. Gretna, I call it. Gretna, Maine." "Gretna?" Vern said, grinning. "What kind of name is that? There ain't no Gretna in Maine." "Shut up, fool," Chris said. "He just told you it was made up, didn't he?" "Yeah, but Gretna, that sounds pretty stupid." "Lots of real towns sound stupid," Chris said. "I mean, what about Alfred, Maine, or Saco, Maine, or Jerusalem's Lot, or Castle fucking Rock? There ain't no castle here. Most town names are stupid. You just don't think so because you're used to 'em, right, Gordy?" "Sure," I said. But privately I thought Vern was right. Gretna was a pretty stupid name for a town. I just hadn't been able to think of another one. So anyway, they're having their annual Pioneer Days, just like in Castle Rock. "Yeah, Pioneer Days. That's a fucking blast," Vern said earnestly. "I put my whole family in that jail on wheels they have, even fucking Billy. It was only for half an hour, and it cost me my whole allowance, but it was worth it just to know where the son of a whore was. Will you shut up and let him tell it? Teddy hollered. Vern blinked. Sure, yeah, okay. Go on, Gordy, Chris said. It's not really much. Nah, we don't expect much from a wet end like you, Teddy said, but tell it anyway. I cleared my throat. So anyway, it's Pioneer Days, and on the last night they have these 3 big events. There's an egg roll for the little kids and a sack race for